The air in Madison Square Garden on the night of May 19, 1962, was thick with the scent of perfume and power. It was a suffocating cocktail, brewed for the powerful and served to the adoring. But beneath the shimmer of 15,000 cheering guests and the blinding glare of 1,000 flashbulbs, another current flowed, a cold, invisible river of secrets. What if the most infamous birthday song in American history wasn't a song at all? What if it was a final, desperate act of blackmail, broadcast live to the entire world? The world remembers a seduction. They were meant to, but what they missed, what the men with ice in their veins and nations on their minds understood all too well, was that Marilyn Monroe wasn't offering her body. She was brandishing a weapon. The event was billed as a birthday salute to President John F. Kennedy, a Democratic Party fundraiser that doubled as a coronation. The room was a gallery of American royalty. The financiers, the kingmakers, the political titans, all gathered to pay tribute to their shining Prince of Camelot. And into this meticulously staged political theater, a phantom was about to drift onto the stage, a ghost of indiscretions past, wrapped in nothing but rhinestones and desperation. She was late, of course. Terribly, unforgivably, strategically late. The master of ceremonies, Peter Lawford, the president's own brother-in-law and Hollywood's liaison to the White House, stalled for time. His jokes grew strained, his smile tighter with each passing minute. He introduced her once, twice, a third time to an empty spotlight. The crowd tittered. The president shifted in his seat. The delay wasn't an accident. It was the overture. Marilyn Monroe was a woman running out of time, and she knew it. The year had been a descent into a private hell. Fired from her film, Something's Got to Give, for chronic lateness and an alleged addiction to pills that were prescribed by the studio's own doctors. Hounded by gossip columnists who painted her as a washed-up, pathetic creature. And, most dangerously of all, she had been cast out of the Kennedy inner circle. The phone calls to the White House and the Justice Department, once answered with eager warmth by both Jack and his brother, the Attorney General Robert Kennedy, were now met with a chilling, impenetrable silence. The lines had gone dead. She had been a useful distraction, a beautiful secret. Now, she was a liability, a loose thread that could unravel the entire tapestry of a carefully constructed myth. So when she finally emerged from the wings, a gasp rippled through the arena. It was a sound somewhere between shock and awe. She was wearing a whisper of a dress, a shimmering column of beige marquisette fabric so sheer, so laden with 2,500 hand-stitched crystals, that it appeared to be made of starlight and skin alone. Under the ferocious heat of the spotlights, she wasn't so much dressed as she was illuminated, an apparition of pure, unadulterated scandal. This was the first part of her message. Visibility. She was ensuring that this moment, this performance, would be seared into the historical record. No one could look away. No one could later deny that she was there. The dress wasn't an impulse. It was a calculated expenditure of power, designed by Jean-Louis at a cost of $12,000, a sum that could have purchased a suburban home in 1962. It was an investment in infamy. She had been sewn into it, the zipper meticulously closed by a frantic wardrobe assistant just moments before she walked on stage. It was a second skin, a beautiful cage of her own making, and it was a direct act of defiance. The First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, had made her distaste for Monroe clear and had pointedly stayed away from the event. The Kennedy clan had warned Peter Lawford to keep Marilyn away. They wanted her erased. Instead, she made herself unforgettable. She wasn't there to seduce a president. She was there to remind him, and the world, of the power she held. This is our first rehook. The accepted narrative is that this was the desperate act of a jilted lover, a pathetic attempt to win back the affection of a powerful man. But the evidence, when viewed through the cold, hard lens of political maneuvering, tells a different story. Why would a woman trying to discreetly win back a lover choose the most public, most scandalous stage imaginable? Why would she choose a performance that would not only enrage his wife, but humiliate the presidency itself? The answer is simple. She was no longer playing the game of love. She was playing the game of survival. She approached the microphone, moving with a deliberate, almost liquid slowness. The crowd, which had been buzzing with anticipation, fell into a hushed silence. She played with them, a slight, breathless apology for her tardiness whispered into the microphone. A little girl, lost on the biggest stage in the world. It was a masterful piece of acting. She was portraying the very weakness the world expected of her, drawing them in, disarming them before delivering the payload. And then, she began to sing, "Happy Birthday to You." The notes were fragile, intimate, a breathy caress that felt deeply, obscenely personal in a room of 15,000 people. This was not the full-throated belt of a professional singer. It was something far more unnerving. It was a bedroom whisper, amplified to the size of a stadium. Every pause, every hesitation, was a coded message for an audience of one. When she sang the line, "Thanks, Mr. President, for all the things you've done," her voice was laced with an irony so sharp it could draw blood. It was a public acknowledgement of a private history, a history filled with secrets she had kept, promises that had been made to her, and pillow talk that could, if revealed, shatter the pristine image of Camelot forever. She was reminding him of their shared past, a past he was now desperately trying to bury. The performance lasted less than a minute. 60 seconds of political theater so potent, its shockwaves are still felt today. The official narrative, cemented by Kennedy's own playful remarks afterward, was that it was a charming, if slightly scandalous, tribute. He quipped, "I can now retire from politics after having had 'Happy Birthday' sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way." The crowd roared with laughter, the tension broken. The president had, with a single line, attempted to defuse the bomb she had just placed at his feet. He tried to frame her as sweet, wholesome, harmless. He knew she was anything but. But what was the bomb? What was the true nature of the threat? To understand that, we must leave the glittering stage of Madison Square Garden and descend into the shadowy world of wiretaps, surveillance reports, and clandestine meetings. We have to look at who else was watching Marilyn in 1962. Because the president wasn't the only powerful man who had an interest in her secrets. And this brings us to our second rehook, the Little Red Diary. For months, Marilyn Monroe had been under near-constant surveillance. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI had a file on her bulging with reports on her communist sympathies, her friendships with known leftists, and, most damningly, her associations with the Kennedy brothers. Hoover loathed the Kennedys and was meticulously collecting dirt, searching for any leverage he could find over the charismatic young president and his ruthless attorney general. Marilyn, they knew, was the administration's Achilles heel, and she was growing increasingly talkative, increasingly unstable. And then there was the mob. Figures like Sam Giancana, the Chicago outfit boss, had their own complicated history with both Frank Sinatra's Rat Pack, of which Marilyn was a peripheral member, and the Kennedys. Giancana had allegedly helped deliver Union votes to get JFK elected, and he felt betrayed when Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General, immediately launched an aggressive, all-out war on organized crime. Giancana and others saw Marilyn as a potential tool, a way to get to the brothers, to remind them of old debts, and to gather blackmail material. There were whispers that her home wasn't just bugged by the feds, but by the mob as well. She was a woman living in a house of whispers, where every phone call was recorded, every conversation monitored. And at the center of this web of intrigue was the rumored existence of a small, red, leather-bound diary. In it, Marilyn supposedly chronicled her most intimate moments, her deepest fears, and the state secrets she had overheard. Details of conversations with Jack about the Cuban Missile Crisis, about the CIA's plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. Confessions from Bobby, about his relentless pursuit of Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa. This diary was a stick of dynamite, and Marilyn, feeling abandoned and betrayed, had begun to hint at its existence to the few friends she thought she could still trust. She was telling them she had stories that would shock the world. Her performance at Madison Square Garden was, in this context, not the plea of a lover. It was the public demonstration of a hostage-taker. She was signaling to every interested party, the FBI, the Mafia, and the Kennedys themselves, that she was not going to be silenced, that she was not going to fade quietly into the background. By singing that song, in that dress, on that stage, she was holding the diary aloft for all the world to see, even if they didn't know what they were looking at. She was saying, "I know what you did, I know what you said, and I am not afraid to talk." The invisible audience for her performance was vast, and no one understood the implications more clearly than the man tasked with protecting his brother's legacy and his family's future, Robert Kennedy. As Attorney General, he was the cleaner, the fixer. His own relationship with Marilyn was a tangled knot of rumor and speculation, a story even darker and more complex than her affair with the president. While Jack's involvement was one of casual dalliance, Bobby's was one of damage control. He was the one sent to contain the problem, to manage the fallout, and as he watched her on that stage, he would have understood the true meaning of her performance instantly. It was a declaration of war, a war she could not possibly win. After the gala, there was a private party at the home of movie executive Arthur Krim. This was the inner sanctum, away from the prying eyes of the press. And it was here, according to several accounts, that the confrontation finally happened. Accounts describe a heated argument between Marilyn and both Kennedy brothers. They describe JFK pointedly ignoring her for most of the night, a public shunning designed to reinforce her new status as an outcast. It was here that the finality of her situation would have become brutally clear. The performance hadn't brought him back to her. It had signed her death warrant. She had shown her hand, revealed the weapon she was willing to use. And in the cold calculus of power, there is only one response to such a threat. In the days that followed, the silence she had feared became absolute. Her direct line to the White House was disconnected. Her calls to the Justice Department were rerouted to secretaries, who politely informed her that the Attorney General was unavailable. The invisible walls were closing in. She had stood on the world's brightest stage and delivered her ultimatum. Believing her fame was a shield, she thought she was reminding them of her power. She had sung her warning to the world's most powerful man, but she had fatally miscalculated who was truly listening in the dark. But who was on the other end of that line? And more importantly, who was listening in? That dangling receiver wasn't just a symbol of a life cut short. It was a crime scene, the epicenter of a frantic, desperate scramble that began hours before Marilyn Monroe was ever declared dead. A scramble orchestrated not by a grieving friend, but by a terrified accomplice. His name was Peter Lawford. As both a member of the Rat Pack and the brother-in-law to the President of the United States, Lawford had spent years walking a tightrope between the glamour of Hollywood and the brutal reality of Washington, D.C. He was the go-between, the social fixer who arranged the liaisons and cleaned up the messes. And on the night of August 4, 1962, he was a man staring into the abyss. Was he trying to save Marilyn? Or was he trying to save the Kennedys from her? The official timeline of Marilyn's last day is a carefully constructed fiction, a house of cards that collapses under the slightest scrutiny. We are told she was depressed, reclusive, spending the day making calls and seeing her psychiatrist, Drive, Ralph Greenson. But eyewitnesses place another, far more powerful visitor at her home that afternoon, Robert Kennedy. Accounts from neighbors, and even a report from a Beverly Hills police officer, describe a tense and volatile scene. They heard shouting, a furious argument. Marilyn, enraged and feeling used, was allegedly threatening to hold a press conference the following Monday. She wasn't just going to expose the affairs. She was going to expose everything. The secrets whispered in bed about Cuba, the mob connections, the dirty deals, the Red Diary. She was going to burn down the whole glittering kingdom of Camelot, and the king's brother had been sent to stop her. According to some investigators, Bobby Kennedy was not alone. He was accompanied by two men, specialists in a field that doesn't have an official name. Let's call them persuaders. Their job was to retrieve the diary and any other incriminating notes. The argument escalated. Marilyn, defiant, refused. What happened next is a vortex of conflicting reports and terrified whispers. The story goes that Bobby and his men left, but the situation was now critical. The threat was no longer abstract. It was imminent. The press conference was scheduled. The bomb was set to go off. That evening, the phone calls from Peter Lawford began. He called Marilyn repeatedly, his voice growing more frantic with each attempt. Her speech, he later told friends, was slurred. She sounded distant, drugged. Her last words to him were chillingly final. Say goodbye to Pat, say goodbye to the president, and say goodbye to yourself because you're a nice guy. Then the line went dead. Now, this is where the official story becomes a physical impossibility. A normal person, a friend concerned for another's welfare, would have done one of two things: jumped in their car and raced over, or called the police. Peter Lawford did neither. Why? Why would a man who believed his friend was dying just a few miles away sit by the phone and do nothing for hours? Was it because he was ordered to stand down? Was he waiting for a different kind of first responder to arrive? Instead of calling the police, Lawford made a flurry of other calls to his agent, to his lawyer, scrambling to establish an alibi and get his instructions. The call for help was deliberately, fatally delayed. During these missing hours, between Marilyn's last call and the official discovery of her body, a sinister ballet was taking place inside her home at 12,305 Fifth Helena Drive. A cleanup operation, the first on the scene, before any police or paramedics, was allegedly a team sent to sanitize the area. Their primary target, the Red Diary, but also any notes, any letters, any piece of paper that connected Marilyn to the Kennedys. The entire house was scoured. Phone records were wiped. Evidence was removed. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, would later give multiple, contradictory statements about the night's events, changing her timeline, fumbling her facts. She first claimed to have found the body around midnight,
then later changed her story to 3:30 a.m.
What happened in those 3.5 hours? It was in this window that the scene of a potential murder was meticulously dressed to look like the sad, lonely suicide of a washed-up movie star. And then there's the body itself.
The man who performed the autopsy was a young, brilliant deputy medical examiner named Thomas Noguchi, a man who would later earn the title Coroner to the Stars for his work on the deaths of William Holden, Natalie Wood, and John Belushi. And Dr. Noguchi found something that blew the official narrative to pieces. The toxicology report confirmed that Marilyn had a massive, lethal dose of nembutyl and chloral hydrate in her bloodstream, enough to kill several people. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning due to probable suicide. But when Noguchi examined her stomach, he found nothing. No pill residue, no telltale yellow dye from the dozens of nembutyl capsules she had supposedly swallowed. It was, he later wrote, a finding that is virtually incredible in a case of oral ingestion. So, if she didn't swallow the pills, how did the drugs get into her system? The evidence pointed to a horrifying alternative. An injection, a single, fatal dose delivered directly into her body. But Noguchi found no needle marks. Or did he? His initial examination was rushed. He was under immense pressure from his superiors to close the case quickly, to sign off on the suicide ruling. Later, he would express profound regret that he hadn't been more thorough, that he hadn't been allowed to examine her organs before they were destroyed. A highly unusual break in protocol. But another possibility exists. One even more sinister and intimate. Investigators have long theorized that the fatal dose was administered via an enema. It's a method that would bypass the stomach entirely, delivering the drugs into the system rapidly and leaving almost no external trace. It's not a method one would choose for suicide. It is, however, a method that requires a third party. It is a method of murder. Who had the knowledge and the access to perform such an act? Suspicion has long fallen on two figures who were there that day. Marilyn's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, and her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, who was also a registered nurse. Greenson had taken unprecedented control over Marilyn's life, isolating her from old friends, monitoring her calls, and prescribing a dangerous cocktail of competing medications. He was the last person, besides Murray, to see her alive. His defenders claim he was a devoted doctor trying to save a troubled patient. But critics see something darker. Was he a pawn of the Kennedys, tasked with keeping Marilyn sedated and under control? Was he the one who administered the fatal dose, perhaps under duress, or as part of a misguided attempt to calm her down that went horribly wrong? His records from that night vanished. The hours of audio tapes from his sessions with Marilyn, tapes that could have held the key to her state of mind, were never submitted as evidence. This wasn't a suicide. It was a disposal, an execution disguised as a tragedy. And the cover-up extended far beyond the Brentwood bedroom. The Los Angeles Police Department's own intelligence files on Marilyn, known as the Gangster Squad files, which detailed her connections to the mob and the Kennedys, mysteriously disappeared from the archives. The FBI's extensive wiretap logs of her phone calls were heavily redacted or outright destroyed. Key witnesses were intimidated. The official investigation was a sham from the start, designed not to find the truth, but to bury it. Every powerful entity that Marilyn Monroe had touched had a vested interest in her silence. J. Edgar Hoover could use her death to forever hold a dark secret over the Kennedys. The Mafia, led by men like Sam Giancana and Johnny Roselli, could eliminate a dangerous loose end and send a chilling message to the Kennedy brothers, who had double-crossed them. And the Kennedy administration itself could erase its single greatest liability, its most explosive scandal, in the middle of the Cold War. She was the one woman who could bring them all down, and they were all listening in on her final, desperate phone calls. But let's step back from the men in the shadows for a moment and consider the woman at the center of the storm. For decades, the narrative has been that Marilyn was a fragile, unstable victim, a beautiful but helpless pawn in a game played by powerful men. But what if that's just another part of the story they wanted us to believe? What if she wasn't just a victim? What if she was a player? Think about her career. This was a woman who had built herself from nothing. From Norma Jean, the orphan girl, into Marilyn Monroe, the most famous woman in the world. She had founded her own production company to fight the studio system at a time when that was unheard of. She was a shrewd negotiator, a voracious reader, and a deeply intelligent person who was constantly underestimated. Is it possible that her threats, her supposed instability, were not signs of a mental breakdown, but calculated moves in a high-stakes game of emotional and political blackmail? Perhaps the Red Diary wasn't just a record of her pain, but a weapon she had carefully crafted.
She knew exactly what she was doing when she sang to Jack Kennedy at Madison Square Garden.
She knew exactly what she was saying when she threatened to hold a press conference. She was using the only power she had left, her fame and their secrets, to try and save her own life, to force them to take her seriously.
She was cornered, yes, but she was fighting back with everything she had.
Her so-called paranoia, the belief that she was being watched, that her phones were tapped, wasn't paranoia at all.
It was the sober, terrifying truth.
She was living in a state of siege, and her increasingly erratic behavior was not madness, but a sane reaction to an insane situation. She fatally miscalculated her own leverage, but she did not miscalculate the danger she was in. She knew what they were capable of.
The tragedy is not that she was a helpless little girl lost in the woods.
The tragedy is that she was a soldier who saw the enemy coming but was ultimately outgunned.
The story of her death is not just about the powerful men who may have killed her. It's about the erasure of the intelligent, formidable woman who fought them until her very last breath.
And there is one final, chilling piece of this puzzle.
A deathbed confession that came years later, from a man who claimed to be there when it all came crashing down. A man who provided a name, the name of the man he saw holding the syringe. The man was a former intelligence operative, a wiretapper, who claimed to have been part of a deep state surveillance team that night. His name was never headline news, just a footnote in a mountain of conspiracy literature. But his story, told in hushed tones decades later, was chillingly specific. The name he whispered, the name of the man he saw in that room with the needle just before Marilyn's last breath was taken, was not a mobster or a rogue doctor. It was the Attorney General of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy.
According to his confession, Kennedy had gone to her house that night not to rekindle a romance, but to end it, and to retrieve any incriminating evidence. Diaries, letters, anything that tied her to the Kennedy clan.
The argument escalated.
Marilyn, cornered and desperate, threatened to expose everything.
It was then, the operative claimed, that a second man, some say her own psychiatrist Drive,
Greenson, arriving on the scene,
prepared an injection, a sedative, not to kill, but to silence, to render her unconscious so they could search the house and leave. But in the panic and the chaos, they administered a fatal dose, an accidental overdose, born from a criminal act. What followed was not a call for an ambulance, but a call for a cleanup crew. The scene was wiped, the incriminating evidence removed, and the carefully constructed narrative of a lonely, depressed star taking her own life was meticulously assembled.
The empty pill bottles were planted.
The story was set. The truth was buried before the body was even cold. Was this operative telling the truth? We may never know for certain. The men he named are long dead. The official records are sealed or destroyed. But his story provides a terrifyingly plausible answer to a question that has haunted us for over half a century.
It transforms the narrative from a simple suicide into a state-sponsored execution, a moment where the highest levels of power collided with the brightest star in the Hollywood firmament, and only one walked away.
Marilyn Monroe's death ceases to be a Hollywood tragedy. It becomes a quintessential American crime story. The legend of Marilyn Monroe, the fragile blonde bombshell, was a character she played. The life of Norma Jean, the intelligent, formidable woman who dared to challenge the most powerful men in the world, was the truth they tried to erase.
Her story is a ghost that still walks the corridors of power, a reminder of the secrets that lie just beneath the gilded surface of our history.
To uncover more of these stories, to look past the manufactured narratives, and seek the truth in the shadows, join us.
Subscribe to Boulevard_of_.